We pray with me. Holy Spirit, we don't need to ask for you to show up because you're already here. But we do ask that you would reveal yourself, that you would reveal truth to us, and that our hearts and our minds would be opened, and that you would give us courage. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I have a long passage to read, so I'm going to ask you maybe to use your imagination. What would it look like? What would it feel like? What would it smell like? And stay with me. This is coming from John chapter 4. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again to Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to the town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, weary as he was from the journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for the disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" For Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God, and who it was that was saying this to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would ask of him, and he would give you living water." And the woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw from. The well is deep. Where are you going to get this living water? Are you greater than the father Jacob, he who gave the well and we drink from it, as did his son and his livestock?" Jesus answered her, "Everyone who drinks from the well will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks from the water that I give will never be thirsty again. The water that I give will become to him a spring of water, living well water." And the woman said, "Sir, give me this drink so that I never thirst again and never have to come and draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go and call your husband and come." The woman answered, "I have no husband." Jesus said, "You are right in saying you have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one that you are with is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on the mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You will worship what you know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that the Messiah has come. He is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all these things." Jesus said to her, "I speak, I am he." And when the disciples came back, they marveled that he was talking to this woman, but no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why are you talking to her?" For the woman left the water jar and went to the town and said to the people, "Come and see the man who told me everything I did. Can it be the Christ?" They went out of the town and were coming to him. Verse 39. Many Samaritans from the town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. "He has told me everything I did." Today we're going to talk about power. Now, the minute I said the word power, some of you rolled your eyes and thought in your head, "Oh boy, here we go." Some of you, your heart started beating a little faster with the excitement. Now, let me define, what am I talking about the word power? I'm not talking about strength. I'm not talking about endurance. I'm not talking about Popeye. For some of you who are under the age of 40, don't even know who Popeye is. I'm talking about social constructs that we experience. Relationships in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, where people get silenced, overlooked, mistreated. And there seems to be no accountability or even awareness. Where labels are slapped on people and it's dehumanizing. It's in our culture, but it's also in our families. It's in our junior high and high schools. It's in our neighborhood, and I dare say it's in our churches. And it touches lots of different areas: race, wealth, gender, sexuality, age. The social constructs that we experience in our world are not just here, but they were also in Jesus's world. And so I want to give a little bit of background before we dive in to John 4. Rome held the political power in Jesus' time for hundreds of years, with the exception of a brief moment of time when they had their independence following the Maccabean revolt. The Israelites for generations had occupied as a colony to Rome. Now, it's hard for us as Western Americans to kind of comprehend the powerlessness associated with being a colonized people. But the religious leaders, the high priests, the Sadducees, they were the political puppets for Rome, but only made up 5% of the people, which means 95% of the people were shaped by being controlled by other people. That 95% were farmers. They were poor. They were homeless. They were hungry. They were in this crippling cycle of debt. Socially, Jesus lived in a culture that was patriarchal, where women were inferior to men, where they were their husband's property. And Jesus was a Jewish rabbi. He was a respected teacher. He had a higher education than a typical Hebrew. In fact, people believe that if you lived closer to Jerusalem, that there was a social standard there that was higher than if you lived far away from Jerusalem, which is where the temple was. And remember that Jesus was a Jew, and there was lots of tension between people who were Jews and people who were not Jews, which we call Gentiles. Okay, keeping all of that in mind, we're going to dive in to John 4. Now, the last time I was here, we talked about how God is like Jesus. And so let's look at how Jesus loved and how his love reckoned with power in John 4. Jesus is on a trip to Galilee. And it says in verse 4 that he had to pass through Samaria. Now, geography is really helpful here. So you're going to see a map. Judea was in the south of Israel, and he's going to Galilee, which is in the north of Israel. In the middle is, or what I like to say, some area in the middle is called Samaria. That's kind of a joke for those of you who haven't heard. And so it seems normal for us to always run from Judea all the way up past through Samaria to Galilee. It would be like me this morning. I went from Colorado Springs and came to Denver, and I passed through Castle Rock, right? Except back in Jesus' time, Jewish people did not go through Samaria. Samaritans were considered to be half-breeds, only half Jewish. And there was so much racial tension there that they would actually cross the river and go around Samaria to get to Galilee. This is where Jesus cuts through the lines, knocks down the barriers, and goes straight to the heart of Samaria. And he finds himself sitting at a well outside of the city. He told his disciples, go get some Jimmy Johns, and I'm going to wait here. And so he's sitting there, and a Samaritan woman comes in the middle of the day. Now, this is an important detail, because women would generally go to the well at the beginning of the day to get their water. But this woman came in the middle, in the heat of the day. Why? We're going to get to that in just a second. But Jesus asks her for a drink. Now, for us Americans, we're like, yeah, he's just having chit-chat with, somebody at the drinking fountain. But that's not what's happening here. Because it was unthinkable for a Jewish rabbi to speak to a Samaritan woman. And then it gets worse, because her reputation is pretty bad. She's considered to be a slut. She's been married 5 times. She's living with the guy. Maybe that's why she didn't go to the well in the morning. Because she didn't want to hear the whispering of the town. She doesn't want to hear the derogatory statements made against her. Or worse, she doesn't want the silent treatment. So she comes in the middle of the day to a well. If I had time, I would really dive into the Old Testament and the significance of this well. If you have time, I would really suggest reading Genesis chapter 16 this week. It's a story of an immigrant woman, a slave, her name is Hagar. And God sees her. In fact, she gives God the name, you are the God who saved me. And it's at this place where God saw Hagar that Jesus sees the woman at the well. She's not overlooked. Jesus actually is ticked at the social structure and struggle that makes people be unseen, makes people be mistreated. In fact, when people feel like they can't be redeemed because they have a physical ailment, a disability, they can't go to the temple, Jesus heals those people during his ministry to give them access to the temple, to give them access to worshiping God. When Jesus sees women being mistreated, he empowers them and calls them to be part of his group. The women were bridged by Jesus' love. He loved the outcast. He loved the disabled. He loved the person who was labeled and mistreated or ignored. And that's exactly what he's doing here in John 4. He walks right into where she lives. He talks to her. He asks her for a drink. He tells her about her life. And then he identifies himself as the Messiah, the promised one, the one who brings change and life and hope. And her life was changed. And the disciples come back and they're shocked to see Jesus talking to this woman. Of course, they don't say anything. But the labels that they have had in their heart against this woman, a woman, a Samaritan, a slut, is written all over their faces. She leaves and she goes into the city and she tells the whole town about Jesus. In fact, in verse 39, many Samaritans come to believe because of this woman's story. See, power is not about control, it's about love. And Jesus loved the woman at the well. He recognized power and he redistributed it. That's how we know that he loved her. He recognized it because he had to go through Samaria. He didn't have to go. But he did have to go to recognize what was going on for this woman in her life and in that society. But then he redistributed the power to her. Do you know that she was the first evangelist in the gospel? She's the first person in Jesus' ministry, according to scriptures, that shares the good news, that shares Jesus' way of living. And a movement happened in her town. How do we live like that? How do we do the same thing? How can we recognize and redistribute power? Because if we're honest, society is ordered in such a way that we can be blind, that we can be unaware of the established patterns that already exist in our world. I recently had a meeting with a bunch of men. And after the meeting, one of the men said, "That was a great meeting." I was like, "It was a great meeting." Because I didn't have a voice in it. I didn't express my opinion. I was dismissed. I was ignored. I was just the woman in the room. But he was on the way to living experience. So how do we become a woman? I think we ask the hard questions. We have to recognize individually, but also systemically where power is at work. I'm mentored by an 18-year-old woman of color called Reese. A few years ago, after George Floyd was murdered, I met with her. And I looked her in the eye and I said, Reese, tell me, how do I respond as a white person to you, to the pain that you're feeling because of what just happened? And she looked at me in the eye. She said, the first thing you have to do is admit that you're a racist. And she paused. And I stopped breathing. And then she said, and I need to admit that I'm a racist too. She was recognizing that there's some sort of power at play here. And at first I had to push back. I was like, I didn't put my knee on his throat. Then the Holy Spirit started convicting me of place in the value of dehumanize people. By categorizing people, by labeling people based on the color of their skin, or the part of town they live in, or the amount of money on their paycheck. I needed to first recognize it in me. And I wanted to deny it. I didn't want to be self-aware of that mistreatment or overlooking or ignoring people based on how I label people. Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus recognizes it and then he redistributes it. So how do we empower people? How do we redistribute power to people? Because he empowered this woman to tell the whole city. What does it look like for us to do that? When I was little, I used to like line up all of my stuffed animals and dolls, and I would preach to them. Like what I played. And then I went to college. And I became a Bible teacher to junior high and high school kids because somehow being a Bible teacher was acceptable, but being a pastor wasn't in my circle. I found myself in Chicago after Paul and I got married. And we were part of a church, and they invited me to be what they called as the College of Preachers. It was a small group of people, 3 or 4 people they would ask every year to go through this 9-month discipleship program and then preach 3 or 4 times in the summer to give the pastors a break. You see, most churches, have 1 or 2 eloquent pastors to kind of bring in a crowd, but the church that I was a part of was purposefully redistributing power to the congregation, inviting lay people to preach 3 or 4 times. And I sat in that when the head pastor of the community that because I wasn't missed, because I wasn't overlooked, because I wasn't just labeled a woman and then dismissed. God's love always reckons with power. What if we were about the same? What if we loved like Jesus and reckoned with power in our lives and in the world? What if we pressed into the differences and saw people? What if those different colors became beautiful colors on a canvas, creating what God really intended? With love and grace and justice and generosity and becoming a family for the heartbeat of Corona Church. We showed up with food instead of labeling somebody as someone who has food stamps. What if we sat with people who annoyed us and pressed into friendship? What if we asked for forgiveness and granted forgiveness for the things that were between us? What if we stopped labeling people? The world is sick and tired of hearing about Jesus. They want to see it. And how do they see it? Us living and loving like Jesus. Where every person in every city and eventually every country loves Jesus' way. I started to imagine, what would it be like if we actually did that? I think it would take 1 week. Because Monday, starvation would be eliminated. Tuesday, racism would die. Wednesday, poverty would end. Thursday, all medical needs would be taken care of. Friday, all orphans would be in homes. Saturday, everyone would hear about Jesus' love. And then Sunday, we would all come back together, not categorizing, not labeling, not divided, but together as one. Pray that God will give us courage at the beginning of this. I believe that God is actively present right here. And He wants to work in our lives. He wants to work in our hearts. From 5th grade all the way up. And so, could you just close your eyes for a second and ask the Holy Spirit to bring about a name, a face, a person, where we would stop dehumanizing, we would stop categorizing, we would stop overlooking or mistreating or ignoring, and we would see people. Think of that person that you've done that to. Confess that. And let's ask the Holy Spirit for courage to love that person this week. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to talk to the Lord, and I'll close in prayer. Jesus, I thank you for your example. I thank you for how you find the barriers in the heart. That you see people, you saw me. That we would have eyes like yours. We would recognize power, we would redistribute it, and we would love you. Give us courage this week to really love you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.